Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where we recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and it's the 3rd of April 2024. Right, everyone, let's get into it. So, some ETF news to kick off our episode today, but it's nothing, I guess, noteworthy. I just feel like I need to explain a couple of things about this. So, there is this filing that happened today that was, I guess, people were looking at it and they were thinking, what does this mean? Is this communications between the SEC and the issuers? Is this actually what we've been looking for? As I've said before, if we don't see communications by like mid-April, maybe a little bit later than that, we can safely say that the ETFs just aren't going to be approved based on the fact that the paperwork won't be done in time by May 23rd here. But there was basically an announcement from this Twitter account, phoenixnews.io, where they said the SEC filed Grayscale Spot ETH ETF conversion, notice of filing of amendment number 1 to a proposed rule change to list and trade shares of the Grayscale Ethereum Trust. Now, from my understanding, this is not back and forth between the SEC and Grayscale. What it is essentially is some of the plumbing being put in place to potentially, trade these things once they get listed, trade the ETH ETFs once they get listed. So I couldn't find much more information on this, to be honest. I was waiting for some of the ETF experts to weigh in, but I think only James weighed in, and he basically said that this was a nothing burger. So, I defer to the experts when I'm not sure of things. But yeah, that doesn't seem like anything of a big deal here. But the reason why I wanted to bring up the ETF stuff again is because there's been a couple of podcasts out recently that I highly recommend that you go listen to. The first one is from Laura Shin, where she basically interviewed 2 lawyers about the ETH ETF, all about it, about the rumors, or I guess reports that the SEC is going after ETH for being a security, that sort of stuff. I listened to it. It was a great episode. Highly recommend going and listening to it. It's on Laura Shin's On-Chain podcast. You can just Google for it there. I don't have the link handy right now. And there was also an episode that I haven't listened to yet, but people have said that they really like it. And that's the one with Bankless, with BlackRock. So they talked about a bunch of different things on there. So you go listen to that. And there's actually a third one as well, which I think I've mentioned before, but it was the one Bankless did with Bitwise. And I think I've talked about this in the Daily Gwei Discord channel a little bit, but the main thing people are focusing on is that the Bitwise guys believe that it would be more bullish if the ETFs were approved towards the end of the year, because there would be more plumbing in place for more access to be had in the TradFi world, because there'd be more infrastructure put in place to trade these things, to buy and sell these things. I don't necessarily disagree with that, where, the longer it goes on, the more, I guess, infrastructure gets set up for the BTC ETFs, which then can immediately be applied to the ETH ETFs. But at the same time, if they being the SEC, deny the ETH ETFs on May 23rd, and let's just say they deny the one on May 23rd, which I believe is ARK, or VanEck, May 24th is another one, and then May 30th, I believe, is the Grayscale conversion. And then, we have a stuttering of ones after that all the way until August, where most of them expire, or most of them have their final deadlines, including BlackRock's. But the logic is that, or some people are thinking that, okay, well, the ETFs are going to get denied, they're very confident in that, but they're going to get denied, gradually. They're not all going to get denied at once. And I guess that's another open question that we have here. But yeah, I do agree with the Bitwise guys that I guess it could be more bullish being approved at a later date, because there'd be more infrastructure in place, which means potentially more inflows. Now, I do want to say one last comment on the ETF stuff before I move on here. There's been a lot of talk lately about the ETFs in the context of that people are very convinced now that these things, the ETH ETFs, are getting denied, and the SEC is just fishing for a reason to deny them. That's why they're doing their expedition, trying to get information about ETH as an asset to try and kind of, I guess, label it as a security. That's why they've been doing the correlation analysis stuff, so on and so forth. Now, I think I mentioned this months ago, where I said that, if the ETFs were to be denied, it would be because of just crappy political reasons. It wouldn't be based on the facts. And that's what seems to be happening in the background here. But at the same time, we don't have any hard evidence of this yet. There is no SEC suit against, the Ethereum Foundation, for example. There is really just reports of various different players in the ecosystem being served subpoenas by the SEC in order to gather information. Now, we don't know what information they requested. We just know that, we believe that one was sent to the Ethereum Foundation, so people are assuming that the SEC is kind of probing for any reason they can find in order to deny the ETH ETFs, because they know they're going to get sued if they deny them. So they, I think, want to find a reason to be able to deny them, and then if they get sued over it, I guess make the odds more in their favor, so to speak, of those lawsuits there. But in saying that, even the lawyers on Laura Shin's podcast argued that they believe that the SEC would ultimately lose any case they were to bring against the Ethereum Foundation or anyone related to ETH being a security here. And, you know, maybe they don't even bring a case towards any I guess, like any party here. Maybe they just say they believe ETH is a security. And because of that, they need to do more work, you know, determining ETH status. And that means they have to deny these ETFs at this date, right? So, as I've said, you know, plenty of times before, it's not going to be based on the facts. It's going to be based on politics and feelings. And on the market impact side of this, you know, if everyone, the way markets work is that they're forward looking, right? Like if you've been in markets long enough, you know that they're forward looking. They price things in, especially things that are quite loud. Like for example, the BTC ETF started being priced in all the way back in, I believe, June. Yes, BTC didn't really break out of 30K until like October, because June was when BlackRock filed for the ETF. And then October was when Grayscale won their lawsuit. And then we had like the Cointelegraph intern post that the ETFs were approved. And then BTC rocketed to 30K, came back down, but then went up because the market basically showed its hand, saying that the market was waiting to essentially buy BTC, but it wanted to get like the best entry that it could. It was happy waiting, but then everyone kind of FOMO'd in after that. And then obviously Grayscale won their case, and then the rest is history from there. So when it comes to, I guess, the ETH ETF, right now, I truly believe that the market has not priced in an approval. It has priced in a denial for the ETH ETFs. And I think I've gone through this before, but I just want to rehash this point here because it's been a topic of discussion in the Daily Gwei Discord channel and other private chats that I'm in with my ETH friends. Essentially, you know, the general vibe is that, well, because ETH BTC has really just been down, you know, down only or kind of like sideways for quite a while now, and because ETH USD is relatively weak, you know, compared to the wider market, it stands to reason that that a denial is being priced in. And that means that when the denial actually comes, or if it actually comes on May 23rd, like, does that mean that ETH is going to go up in value instead of down? Because once you get to May 23rd and the, you know, the news is out there, does it become a buy the news event? Because if everyone's already sold, if everyone's already shorted ETH, or everyone's already kind of offside ETH because they were pricing in the denial here, then who's left to sell? That's the kind of question at that point. Like, is anyone actually going to sell on the denial, or is ETH just going to go up because everyone already priced in the denial, right? So that I don't believe that that's like hopium or anything like that. You know, I still think they're going to get approved on May 23rd, but obviously the window is closing here, guys. Obviously, I'm like the last man standing at this point in time. And, you know, I think, as I said, like if in the first couple of weeks of April, we don't really hear anything from the SEC, then just based on the time it will take to do the paperwork, yeah, it's probably not going to happen, right? And I'll adjust my view at that point in time. You know, I'm not going to give up just yet. I want to go until like as late as I can, just based on principle. But, you know, as I've explained in detail before, based on the facts and circumstances, they should be approved. Based on the way the SEC acts and Gary Gensler's feelings, we know that, you know, there's a high chance that they won't be approved just based on that there. But then the thing is that if they do get approved on May 23rd, like the market hasn't priced that in either. So the market has priced, the market hasn't priced that in. So the market has priced in a denial, right? And if a denial happens, then I believe ETH is not going to sell off on that. And it depends on what you know, what price ETH is at that point in time. You know, maybe until May 23rd, ETH goes up to all-time high and then sells off once the ETFs get denied, right? But I'm talking about if we're in the same situation we are in now, where ETH BTC hasn't really performed, ETH USD is lagging the general market here, I do believe that, you know, ETH is going to actually just perform well after, you know, after it gets denied. And then on the approval front, this is where it gets, I guess, like a bit funny, because if it is going to be approved on May 23rd, we're probably going to see signs of that before May 23rd. And then will the market really, you know, really quickly re-rate ETH up if it starts gaining confidence in it being approved again? And the market tends to work like that, because it did that with the, you know, the Grayscale winning their lawsuit against the SEC. The market was like, oh shit, like this means that the BTC ETFs are probably going to get approved and we need to get in. And that's why the, you know, the market was caught offside with the fake news of the ETFs being approved in October and showed its hand basically. So I think that the market right now does not want to show its hand when it comes to ETH. And people could call this hopium or whatever they want. But based on the facts and circumstances and based on the way that markets work, I really do think that it could be, you know, even if they get denied, it doesn't necessarily have to be bad for ETH. Now, of course, if they get denied on May 23rd, it's just a when, not if, of when they're going to get approved from there. And we're going to play out the circus as it will be from there. But that's my general thoughts on the market side of things there. But I know I said I didn't want to go on too long about this, but it's something that unfortunately I think about too much because everyone asked me questions about it. So I figured it was worth clarifying again. But enough on the ETF stuff, diving into the Ethereum news from the last 24 hours. So first up,
We have the delivery at dawn, which was the AIP 4844 1 minute short that came out with Denkun. There was an NFT for this, and the mint is now closed. So I mean, it closed on Sunday, and Trent Van Epsia, one of the people behind this, tweeted out some stats about it. So there was 35,000 mints with 19,000 unique minters. 138 ETH is going to the Protocol Guild, and 38.4 ETH is going to Nounsdale for the production costs of the 4844 short there. So that is a lot of money going to the Protocol Guild, guys, from just this single NFT mint here. I mean, 138 ETH at current price of ETH. Let me do some math here. That is a whopping almost $500,000 worth of ETH going into the Protocol Guild just for this NFT, basically, which is just crazy to me. But you know, it's awesome to see that people are, you know, very much willing to essentially mint these NFTs, very much willing to spend the money that's needed here in order to support the Ethereum core developers and in order to kind of get a piece of history, if you will, as well, since the 4844 short was the first time that an EIP ever had like an animation or a short made about it. I'm hoping that we can, you know, keep doing that as time goes on. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that there. I hope you guys had a chance to mint that. I remember I shouted it out on the Refuel a bunch of times, so hopefully you minted that one there. All right, so we have some updates about DevCon, which is happening in Bangkok in Thailand this year. So you can see here the DevCon account tweeted out saying, "We are thrilled to introduce the Road to DevCon events calendar." So you can find all of the events and communities near you and what's going to be happening, you know, leading up to obviously DevCon, and then when you're at DevCon there as well. So just a reminder here, DevCon is taking place from November 12th to November 15th in Bangkok, Thailand. The main conference is taking place over 3 days, but usually there's like, I guess like a solid week of events that kind of surround that, and then maybe even up to like 2 weeks of events that surround that. So it's good to be, you know, I guess like if you can be in Bangkok, maybe a couple days before and a couple days after DevCon, there's always events happening here and there. But yeah, this will be the website to kind of, I guess, like keep the tabs on and look into, and basically keep bookmarked so that you know which events are happening where and when they're happening, especially around DevCon, so you can apply to attend those events there. So yeah, I'll link that in the YouTube description below for you guys to go check out and bookmark on your end. All right, so a lot has been happening in Blob land recently. I know I said that we needed to wait a few weeks before we got some great insights into what was happening with Blobs after they went live. So obviously they went live on March 13th. It's not a month yet. I mean, we're still 10 days out from a month since 4844 went live, but it's been 20 days. And we already have a lot of really cool insight into the Blob market, into how L2s are using Blobs, as well as other participants on the network here. So 0x Rob tweeted out that total spend on Blob fees as of April 2nd was $1.9 million, and it would have cost the same, it would have cost to post this same data as call data at $50 million. So essentially, instead of paying $50 million, L2s plus, I guess, inscriptions have paid $1.9 million. So the Blobs have currently given us a 80 to 90% discount and a fee market that is not as correlated to market trends as the regular EIP 1559 fee market, which you can see in this chart here, which is exactly going back to what I was saying about having an orderly settlement layer, or I guess like an orderly fee market in Blobs, where essentially all of the Blob players are incentivized not to have fee spikes, right? Essentially to keep it as smooth as possible. And you can actually see that playing out right on this chart here. You can see that call data spikes and has random spikes because it shares the same fee market as everything else on L1. But then you have the Blobs, which has its own fee market, and it's relatively stable there, which has been just great to see that thesis playing out there. And as I said, it's only been a little while here, hasn't even been a month yet, but we're already seeing these trends play out, and we're already seeing that 80 to 90% reduction, which is essentially what a lot of the estimates put it at. So that's great to see. So yeah, that's really, really cool there. And also, there's a couple more things and a Dune Analytics dashboard that you should go check out here from 0x Rob that tracks a bunch of these things here. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But staying on the topic of Blobs here, Blobs are now ranked number 4 on the ETH fee burn leaderboard over the last 7 days. So I want to discuss a little bit of FUD here for a second that has been popular in the ecosystem for a little while now. Like, have you guys ever come across the FUD that says layer 2s are parasitic to Ethereum, right? Of course you have. Like, this is a popular piece of FUD that a lot of the Ethereum detractors love to use, because they say, okay, well, you know, if everyone moves to layer 2 Ethereum, who's using layer 1 Ethereum? Which obviously is the stupidest thing to say if you're even a little bit informed in how Ethereum works. But just to give you a recap, and why it's stupid. Just two main points. First point is that layer 2s pay layer 1. Like, they pay layer 1 for their security. They pay to post their data, whether that be as core data or blobs. They pay, to settle their kind of transactions on there. They pay to put their proofs on there. They have their bridges on there, right? They have their escape hatches on there. They have everything on there. That's like, they use layer 1 Ethereum. And then 2, you still have all the normal usage of layer 1 Ethereum. And even if the layer 1 fees get so expensive that regular users can't afford it, there's still going to be people paying for it, because that's the whole thing, right? Like, if let's say that Gwei is constantly at like 200 and it prices out pretty much like every regular users, even the whales don't want to spend that fee anymore. Well, someone's spending that fee, right? Like, and it's probably the institutions at that point that are using it, and the L2s that are not nearly as fee sensitive as individuals are, because the L2s are basically institutions themselves or businesses themselves, right? So that's like the piece of FUD that's just been completely proven wrong. Like, even in the last 20 days of Blobs being live here, as you can see, where we've already burned 672 ETH in the last 7 days from Blobs, which accounts for, which makes it number 4 on the burn leaderboard, behind only Uniswap, ETH transfers, and Tether. Now, to catch Uniswap is quite a while away. Uniswap did like 5x as many, as much of a fee burn here, but that's only natural, right? So, but the fact that it is in the top 5 already, and then if you account Scroll here, because Scroll isn't using blobs right now. So if you count Scroll with just blob fees, that brings it over 1,000. I think that gives it more than Tether that it's burnt, which means it would be number 3 on this leaderboard if you count like the L2 usage of kind of the fee burn here. But in saying that, I do want to clarify this by saying that the blobs are not only being used by L2s, right? They're not only being used by rollups, it's also being used by inscriptions. And there's a perfect dashboard that you can go look at here from Hildobby that shows you this. So you can see here on this chart, the blobs posted after the last 5 days. What does that look like? Well, inscriptions are in purple. So you can see that roughly, I don't know, it's not half, but like a healthy chunk is inscriptions here. But then you scroll down a little bit and you can actually see this pie chart here of blob submitters over the last 4 hours. And you can see that inscriptions only accounts for 36%. The rest of it is L2s basically. So you've got Linnea here, you've got Base, Optimism, and others, Arbitrum, so on and so forth, right? So even if you were to take away the inscriptions, I guess, like fees from this kind of chart that I have here, from this table that I have here, blob fees would still be, I think, number 7 or something like that instead of number 4. So it would still be in the top 10 of fee burners here. And this is only 20 days after blobs went live, guys. This is before a lot of these L2s have even kind of scaled up their execution usage. I know Base has scaled it up already, but Arbitrum's going to be doing that. I'll talk about that in a sec. Arbitrum's upgrades there, but so are the other L2s. And there's going to be more L2s coming online soon, and the demand for blobs is just going to keep going up. So obviously, L2s are not parasitic to ETH in the slightest, because of the fact that they are directly driving value back to ETH via the fee burn. But like, as I discussed the other day when I talked about this subject, they also use ETH as money. Even if they use their own native token as the fee token, I'm not talking about that. People use ETH as money on these networks. It increases the ETH network effect. It increases the ETH economy, the Ethereum economy here, and increases the network effect of all of that. So it's just insane to me that people say that L2s are parasitic to Ethereum when the, I guess, like, facts are completely different to that. The facts show you that they're not. They're completely additive to ETH's value and will continue to be. And blobs, 20 days in, are already number 4 on the burn leaderboard here. We'll see how that looks like in, you guys know I like my long-term trends. Let's revisit this in like 6 months and see where that's at. I am very confident that blobs is still going to be, top 5, maybe top 10. Depends on like what happens on layer 1. Obviously, layer 1 can be quite volatile here, but it's great to see that once again, the haters are wrong, the fudsters are wrong, the people who actually pay attention to the facts, pay attention to the evidence are right. And that's, what I like to do. You guys know I always try and stick to the facts and circumstances here. And it's great to see that becoming reality, because you guys know my favorite thing to say, narrative's a narrative, reality is reality. And when the reality hits, it's undeniable at that point. So yeah. Anyway, you can go check out all of those things that I just talked about with regards to blobs. I'll link them in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so I mentioned that I wanted to quickly talk about Arbitrum. So, guys know that Arbitrum has this new Stylus upgrade that they're bringing to the entire Arbitrum ecosystem, in particular Arbitrum 1 here, where essentially you can build smart contracts in programming languages other than Solidity. So they've highlighted Rust here. There's going to be more compute per gas, which means more scalability. And then there's going to be full EVM interoperability as well for this. So compiled down to the EVM from Rust, for example, here, which is great. So the reason why this has been brought up today is because there is an AIP, or an Arbitrum improvement proposal, to activate Stylus and enable the next-gen WebAssembly smart contracts as part of the Arbitrum ecosystem here. So there are a lot of details in this post. I'll link that in the YouTube description below. But this is going to be a huge unlock for the Arbitrum ecosystem. It's going to be a big scalability upgrade. It's going to be a big upgrade in terms of increasing the amount of developers that can use Arbitrum, or I guess like can build on top of Arbitrum. And it's going to be a big unlock for users, because users are going to get cheaper fees at the end of the day, which is obviously the North Star of all of these L2s out there. But also, the reason I'm so excited about it is not necessarily because of the cheaper fees, because that to me is table stakes at this point, but it's the more experimentation, right? It's experimenting with things other than Solidity. It's experimenting with different ways of metering gas and kind of getting scalability out of that, right? That's what I love about these things there. But, in terms of gas fees on Arbitrum and others right now, I should actually bring this up here, gasfees.io. You can see that they're still very, very cheap. I mean, all the L2s with blobs for a Uniswap trade, they're pretty much like between 5 and 10 cents. You can see here that Arbitrum is around 5 cents right now. Base is around 3 cents, almost 4 cents, but Base obviously increased their scalability recently there. Zora's 4 cents, OP Mainnet 10 cents, so on and so forth. And then you can see what it would be like without blobs. So for Scroll, it's $1.22. So Scroll's fees are a lot more than the others here, because they're not using blobs right now. But obviously when they start using blobs, we'll see that those costs come down there. But also at the same time, I think that there's going to be it's going to be a little bit of a weirdness, right? Where essentially the fees, because they're not really influenced by the data costs, because we have blobs, they're going to be heavily influenced by the compute cost, the execution cost. And because of that, there'll be periods of time, like we saw recently, where some of these L2s will spike really high in fees. Like, for example, base fees were spiking up to more than $1, right? And then they were able to increase the capacity there, and they're able to increase their gas limit there, and they've brought fees down again. But if we're talking about like that was just the spikes of fees. If we're talking about like the median fees, then I think base was at maybe like 30 cents, and then they brought it back down to 3 to 5 cents or something like that, depending on what you're doing. This is for a Uniswap trade here, but then the other L2s basically separate instances again. So they're gonna scale their compute and their execution in their own ways. And then we have more L2s coming online soon that they're not using blobs yet, but maybe they will in the future. And that's the thing, like people are going to compare those to the rollups that are using blobs, right? So for example, Eclipse, which is the SVM L2, that's using Celestia for data availability. So it's not going to be using blobs initially. Maybe they do in the future, but they're not going to be using blobs from the get-go, which means that theoretically their fees would actually be cheaper here because of the fact that they're using off-chain DA. Obviously, they're taking a kind of like security trade-off here, but I believe they're targeting like a 1 cent fee, and they're trying to keep it at 1 cent. But of course, Eclipse is SVM, right? It's not EVM, whereas basically all of these networks are EVM right now, the ones on this list in front of me here. So it's going to be interesting to see what that all kind of looks like there and how people compare those there. But yeah, you can go check out this AIP from Arbitrum. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, last up here is a question from the Daily Gwei Discord community here that I wanted to answer, because I didn't really answer this today because I woke up to it and I kind of just gave like a nothing reply to Narizard here, and I felt really bad about it. So I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna like type up a whole paragraph about this. I'm just gonna answer it on the on the refuel here for Narizard. So yeah, I hope this answers your question here. But basically, they asked and they said here, regarding the issuance curve / burn, could there ever be a point in which the burn is so high that the supply of ETH could theoretically speaking go to zero? If someone could snippet reference the code or the path in the repo to the relevant code, I'd appreciate it. Also, if that is the case, shouldn't there be a value weight associated with the volume burned? As supply dwindles and value goes up, less is burned. So the thing is about this question is that it's quite broad, and it's based on like a lot of assumptions. And what I mean by this is that if you look at the total ETH supply today, right, it's like 120 million or something like that. And let's say, in theory, we could get that down to zero. Like, First of all, do you understand what the price of ETH would be in that world? The price of ETH would be astronomical. Secondly, it wouldn't even work in practice to begin with, because to stake ETH, to become a validator, you need a minimum of 32 ETH, right? And the beacon chain needs a minimum of 512,000 ETH, I think, from memory, in order to actually even exist in the first place. I think that if it dips below that, the beacon chain actually isn't online anymore, which means Ethereum goes offline, essentially. I believe that's the case. That was at least the case to start the beacon chain back when it first got started there. I don't know if that's still the case today, but obviously there's still going to be, you know, a portion that is staked there. And obviously you can't use LSTs or LRTs to pay fees. It's always raw ETH. So, you know, in theory, it can't even happen, because it means that the network would be offline before it even happened, because there would be no validators left. Even if you say that only one validator needs to be online, well, there would be no validator online if the ETH supply is 0, because there's no 32 ETH there, right? So when you look at it from that perspective, even in theory, it can't go to 0. And then you look at it in practice and say, okay, well, how low can it go? Maybe not to literally 0, but can it get to a point where essentially there isn't enough ETH to go around, no one can get their hands on ETH, they can't use ETH for anything, so on and so forth. And I mean, in theory, you know, that could happen, but in practice, it's extremely impractical and extremely implausible for a bunch of different reasons. And the first reason is because, as I said, the price of ETH would be so high in this world, which means that because the gas fees are metered in Gwei and not in the USD price, essentially what happens is that, you know, maybe the Gwei price is like 100 Gwei, but in USD price, that would be a lot more if ETH is like $1 million versus ETH being like $3,000, right? So there's going to be like a ceiling to how much people are willing to pay on the network. And there's always going to be a balancing act between those things, just as part of the natural fee market here. But I think the stronger point here is that the Ethereum network issues ETH every 12 seconds as part of consensus layer rewards. So it already, and I mean, okay, it issues that ETH as part of the consensus layer rewards, but in saying that, that new ETH is only available once the ETH is kind of swept out of a validator here, and that happens periodically. I mean, it happens on a rolling basis, and I think it's every few minutes or something like that. So I think it's every epoch, so 6 minutes or something. So in that world, there is still ETH being issued, but in that world, imagine the craziness that would happen around that, right? Imagine ETH is $1 million or $2 million ETH because of the fact that we have barely any ETH and there's so much demand for it because so many people want to use the network. And then essentially what happens is that every new ETH that is minted is just so much money worth, and you can't stake more ETH because there's no ETH left to stake. And that means that the existing stakers are getting so much, for their money. What happens to LSTs and LRTs in that world? When you actually kind of think about it and think about what it could actually look like, I really do think we'll never get to that world, because in the world that if that world did exist, it would actually break a lot of our assumptions. But I think that naturally we just won't ever get there because of the fact that we expect, as the ETH price, as more ETH is burned, the ETH price trends up over time, because it's just a scarcity factor, right? It's a supply and demand factor, where essentially that, people will say, oh, well, you can't rely on scarcity if there's no demand. If I say, oh, I've got one of these, I painted this cool picture, there's one of them in the world, that makes it super rare, I'm going to charge $1 million for it. Well, that's not how it works, because it's only worth $1 million if someone pays me $1 million for it, right? But with ETH and with the fee burn, is that we're only burning fees because someone is, has ETH to burn, essentially, and someone is using that ETH. Now, if no one has ETH left and they have to go keep buying it from the open market in order to use it as fees, well, there's your demand driver, right? So from that world, the demand would essentially collapse if people don't want to buy the ETH for that amount of money, because it's not worth it to use the ETH on the network to do some kind of transaction that brings marginal value to them. So this question, as I said, it is really deep on, it might be simple on the surface in that you look at it and you're like, okay, that can't happen because it sounds silly, but in theory, it can happen to an extent where we just burn some. I mean, we can't go to 0. As I said, we can't go to 0 ETH, but we could burn so much ETH that essentially it becomes, ETH's price just goes so astronomical that we have a balancing act essentially where it takes less ETH to do transactions on the network, because let's say the network only wants to pay at most $1,000 per transaction or something like that. I know that sounds crazy, but let's say the network only wants to pay $1,000 per transaction. That is the max, and anything over that people are not willing to pay for. Well, then if ETH is $1 million, you need 0.0001 ETH, I think, or something like that, if I'm doing my math correctly there, as opposed to needing 0.3 ETH today. And of course, ETH is divisible up to 18 decimal places as well. So you've got that working in favor of ETH there. So yeah, I guess like the TLDR here is that in theory, we could burn so much ETH that essentially it doesn't go to zero, but it goes to such a low value that, it becomes like a potential issue for the network based on everything that I just mentioned, other unforeseen circumstances. But in practice, I don't expect that to ever be the case. I expect the ETH price to continue trending up because of that, because, all else being equal, if there's more demand than supply, then the price should go up over time. And I'm talking about like longer term here. I'm not talking about short term, of course, because short term, anything can happen, but that's how I kind of view it there. But yeah, the real point here, I think that many people don't mention is that ETH is actually inflationary by default. It's only deflationary when we have more burn than issuance, but Ethereum is always issuing new ETH in the form of consensus layer rewards to stakers, right? And on top of that as well, stakers also get a share of MEV rewards and the tips of fees as well. So not all of the fees are burned. So if, they're getting 20% tips there, those are worth, an astronomical amount to it in this theoretical world here. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Narazad. Again, apologies for like being blunt about it on the Discord channel, but I woke up, I hadn't had my coffee yet, and I'm like, oh my God, this question is just, yeah. And that's why I think I originally replied to you saying, don't think so, just because I was like running it through my head and I'm like, nah, that doesn't make sense just on the surface to me. And now I'm explaining my rationale of how I kind of arrived at that conclusion there. But yeah, as I said, hopefully that answers your question there. And guys, if you guys have questions that you'd rather me answer on the refuel rather than in the Discord channel, please, maybe DM me them or something like that, because I am much better at answering things when I'm talking about them than when I'm writing about it. And I can just fit it into the refuel, and then I can just educate so many more people about it. The 5,000 or so people that listen and watch the refuel every day, because I know a lot of people aren't in the Daily Gwei Discord channel and they probably miss it and things like that. So if you have questions like this that you think are relevant to the wider community, please, ask it maybe in DM so it doesn't get lost in the channel there. And I'm always down to answer those there. But on that note, that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.